Welcome to the Learn Skin podcast with me, Dr. Raja.
And me, Dr. Hadar, where we discuss all things skin.
Join us as we delve into the art and science of skin health in today's episode.
Hey, Raja, can you say the thing I told you to tell them?
Of course. We are board-certified dermatologists. This podcast is meant for educational and informational purposes only and is not considered medical advice, nor does it serve as a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. All opinions shared do not express the views of Learn Health, Inc. Let's get to the good stuff.
Hey, Raja, how are you today?
Hey, Hadar, how are things going? I've just been thinking more and more about how we get our medications and how we get them priced. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I've been thinking about that as well. We all get patients in our clinic. They come in, we say, hey, here's a medication you need. We write a prescription that used to go smoothly. And all of a sudden, it's like Russian roulette. Will the patient get the medication? How much do they have to pay? Is it covered at all? It's really, really insane, don't you think?
Totally insane. And in fact, we have a very esteemed guest who is quite knowledgeable in this area. This is Dr. Mark Kaufmann. And he is currently the immediate past president of the American Academy of Dermatology. He's served on the AAD Board of Directors. He's also been an advisor to the Academic Relative Value Scale Update Committee, known as the RUT Committee. He's currently the Chief Medical Officer at Advanced Dermatology and Cosmetic Surgery. He's also a clinical professor in the Icahn School of Medicine in the Department of Dermatology at Mount Sinai. So definitely has a lot of experience, no slouch. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, Mark, great. Thank you for being with us. And, I want to take it back for a second and ask you, because it's something I'm always curious about when we have someone so accomplished such as yourself, a successful dermatologist, a leader in our field, and all of a sudden you find yourself interested in pricing, which sounds kind of boring. How did you get into this? What made you really, decide, hey, I want to look into this and see what's going on?
So it's been bothering me for many years as well. And what really drove me to dig deeper into this is everyone kept saying, it's all these greedy pharmaceutical companies. And I'm not here this evening to tell you that I don't think that pharmaceutical companies make plenty of profit. I think they do. But there's more to it than that, because so many of them are trying to make more affordable products and they can't successfully bring them to market at lower prices. And so I wanted to find out why that was. And the research that I've done in this has been both a shock as well as infuriating for me to find out.
Yes, it is absolutely infuriating. Sometimes I think to myself, how does this happen? How did we get here? I write a prescription and then I don't know what's happening with it. I don't know how the price is getting covered. We look at a medication that should cost a few dollars. All of a sudden, it's thousands of dollars. So many people exchange hands in the process. And by the time the patient gets it, so many people had to work on it. The cost has been inflated. What is going on? How did we even get here?
Yeah, basically the supply chain, right? The pharmaceutical supply chain.
So you're right. It used to be, and I even tell residents this when I talk to them these days, is there used to be a time when we would actually write a prescription on a prescription pad, give it to a patient, and they would actually get what we wrote down on the prescription pad when they left the pharmacy. It hardly ever happens anymore, right? I mean, how many prescriptions just glide right through? And unfortunately, sometimes we tailor our day to try and use prescriptions that will glide through rather than give the patients the prescriptions that they really need. And that's terrible for good clinical care. And the reason we do that is because there's so many obstacles now about getting the right medication to the right patient. And a lot of that is due to people who really have no benefit to the supply chain. Raja mentioned the supply chain. The supply chain typically in any commercial transaction in the U.S., basically, you manufacture, you bring it to the local market, you sell it for a small profit, and everybody is happy. The problem becomes when you have these other people who intercalate into the supply chain and don't add any value to the product. And when it comes to prescription medications, these are the pharmacy benefit managers that are these intermediaries who basically enrich themselves and are there, and they hurt our patients and they hurt the pharmaceutical companies.
Mark, can you talk more about that? Like, what does a pharmacy benefit manager do, and how are they able to even intercalate themselves in between? Like, how did this happen?
So what happens at, it used to be when I first started practicing in the early 90s, it was just the beginning of the HMOs. And that coincided with the time that health insurance for the first time really was going to cover prescription medications. Until then, prescription medications were basically a free market. And it basically was, you bought the medicine that the doctor wrote and it wasn't covered by your health insurance. And what the HMOs did is they introduced coverage for prescription medicines, which everyone thought was great at the time because medications were getting a little more expensive. And the health insurance companies started hiring these companies called pharmacy benefit managers to help them negotiate for lower prices with the pharmaceutical companies. And that's what the genesis was of pharmacy benefit managers. But what happened was, like every other good start, it turned into a business and later turned into a racket. And that's exactly what happened here, is they became these huge behemoths of companies that now control healthcare rather than are there to help negotiate for lower prices.
Wait, so help me understand this, because you're saying they're going to negotiate for lower prices. And, I get it. I understand that drugs cost money. Pharmaceuticals come in. They invest a lot in research and development. They take a drug from discovery, phase 1, 2, 3, first in humans, have to prove safety, have to negotiate with FDA. They have so many costs. And then they're trying to obviously make some money in the process so they can invest in new drugs, hopefully, and they bring value to the market. And we thought that the PBMs will come in and maybe help negotiate the prices. Yet here now we're seeing this crazy process where the prices are more expensive here in the US, where we make the investment. All the research, at least most of it, is done in the United States. Yet our prices are much higher because of PBMs, as opposed to, let's say, Canada, South America, Europe, etc. How did we end up there? I mean, how did this happen?
So they have to, if you have a new drug, it's probably going to be, an expensive process to go through all the phases you just talked about. And it is very expensive for a company to do that. So they want to recoup their investment from the R&D portion of their development. And so they would come to a pharmacy benefit manager who takes this to the health insurance companies. And they would say, I think we should price it at this amount. And, the original intent of the pharmacy benefit manager was to say, well, we're going to pay a little less than that. So we'll get you on formulary by, making it more affordable to the insurance company. That was the way it worked at the beginning. And at some point, it just turned itself on its head. And they started saying, you know what? We need you to raise the price of your medication rather than lower it, because that way we can take what they call rebates, which is just a euphemism for kickback, so that they raise the price of a drug so that they can take their, percentage off the top in order to enrich themselves. Now, the problem here is that they're no longer enriching themselves. The problem is that the top 3 PBMs are actually now in bed with health insurance companies. In other words, Aetna is now the same thing as CVS Caremark. They merged. Cigna bought Express Scripts, and Optum is a subsidiary of United Healthcare. Those 3 companies process 80% of the prescriptions in the United States. Those 3 companies are the number 4, 5, and 13 companies by revenue in the United States. So we're not talking about powerful companies. We're talking about 3 of the most powerful companies in the country. And
wow, that leads.
Yeah, that leads to other issues that we can talk about later. But basically, it basically makes them very powerful when it comes to going to Washington, when it comes to donating political contributions. And the one thing that's really apparent when you look up on opensecrets.org who the biggest donors are for political campaigns, it's not just the amount of money that you see that these companies give, but it's the absolute 50-50 nature, because these companies don't care who's in power because they're in everybody's pocket.
Wow, this is really crazy. I mean, you think that the pharmaceutical companies have power. Now they're combining together these pharmacy benefit managers with the insurance companies. Wow, this is really crazy.
No, it is. And actually, Hadar, if you don't mind, I want to jump in with a question here, which is, Mark, we have all these things like anti-kickback and, trying to make sure you're not just taking cuts of stuff all along the way. If these are health insurers and they're also owning the pharmacy benefit managers, they're basically price setting everything at that point, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, there is an anti-kickback law that we all have to abide by in the healthcare system, but PBMs don't. And that's where the problem is that the 1987 Medicare anti-kickback safe harbor was originally designed for hospital group purchasing organizations. And for some reason, in 2003, it was extended to PBMs. Now, what did this do is it allowed PBMs to do what they're doing with getting rebates or kickbacks, and they were exempt from having to follow the anti-kickback statute. They were given safe harbor. Now, this is the problem. The problem is that they can do all of this, and they are protected by a law to not have to disclose what they're doing. And I usually, when I talk about this, I usually, and I don't like to make light of the dead, but John Gotti, who was the godfather of one of the biggest crime families in New York, would be, if he were alive, he would be hitting his head against his cell wall, thinking like, why didn't I think of that? Because not only are they putting their hands in the pockets of our patients and not giving them any value in the process, but they have a law that protects them from having to tell anyone what they're doing. And the cure for all of this, for all of the PBM nonsense that we live through, is transparency. And every couple of years, there's an effort for transparency. And to be honest, we're living through a time right now when the FTC has called on the big three PBMs and some of those smaller ones to give them more information. They're trying to make transparency rules. And Congress sometimes comes up with it, and we go to advocate for it almost every year. AAD has a legislative conference. As part of our ask is always to ask for transparency for the PBMs. And they all nod their heads, yes, this is terrible. And then magically around election time, all of these efforts seem to disappear. So when people, and a lot of people are sending me emails telling me that, look at this, it looks like we're finally going to get a Transparency Act for PBMs. I tell them I'll believe it when I see it, because they tend to disappear when things start to require contributions. So we don't have a happy ending yet.
Wow, yeah, talk about definitely not an ending yet. I mean, well, Mark, tell me something good. Tell me doctors can maybe stop this, right? Because right now you're describing a scenario where a physician can maybe stop this, right? The insurance company wants to cover a medication that they want, and the pharmacy says, we'll cover it, but the doctor can try to maybe write a prescription and kind of circumvent that, right? To say, no, this is what the patient needs, and this is it. You can't tell me. I'm a free physician. I can write what I want, right? Please don't tell me that the physicians are now getting streamlined into it, because that will be really scary.
It's a little scary because now that these three companies will take the big three, CVS, Express Scripts, and Optum, now that they've become part of health insurance companies, they're not done yet. They have actually started buying up physician practices. And this is the real scary part, because then they're going to control the entire supply chain, right? Because they're going to be the insurer, they're going to be the PBM, they're already the specialty pharmacy, and then they're also going to become the physician services. And CVS, they spent $8 billion last year to get a home healthcare company, and they spent $11 billion after that to buy Oak Street Health, which is a primary care group in the United States. So that's almost $20 billion that they spent on physician services, and they're not done yet. And I think we're going to start to see, and there are even dermatologists who are indirectly being bought by companies like Optum, because they're buying multi-specialty clinics. None of them are really interested yet in dermatology practices, but they're buying multi-specialty groups that do have dermatologists in them. And there's some in the New York area that were large dermatology groups that part of a multi-specialty group that are now owned by Optum. And so I think that this is really a problem that we're going to be facing over the next 5 to 10 years unless there's some changes to the laws of how much these guys can control.
Wow, Mark, this is pretty incredible. So take me through this for a second because our listeners are trying to keep up with us. And here we go. So now you're telling me I'll be part of the streamlined process where there's a pharmacy benefit manager that is in bed together with the insurance company and the specialty pharmacy. And now they're going to own my practice. And are they going to dictate to me what to write? I mean, for example, they can say, oh, write this biologic, but not that biologic. How much power they're going to have? How is this going to work out? I mean, maybe is this something that's already happening maybe?
Right. And we've seen this already. I mean, there's stories of patients receiving gift cards or told that they would get gift cards if they could convince their dermatologist to change them from one biologic to another. These are real stories that we're hearing now. So basically, each of these insurance companies having a PBM of their own right now, they probably have different preferred biologics, say for psoriasis, that are less expensive for them to procure. And it's not always the same. And they're going to be telling you that, you can go ahead and write for this biologic without any step edits, but you're going to have a lot of step edits if you write for this one. And all of a sudden, they're directing care for our patients.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think that this integration can get that vertical. So I do have a question then in terms of like our prescribing. Is it, and there's two different questions, then is it cheaper for us to perhaps prescribe to a private pharmacy that isn't one of these big corporate entities? Can they keep the prices lower, first of all, if it's like something that's generic? Because I see a lot of the up pricing on the generics much more than, I'm sure it's across the board, but the generics are always way more expensive than I expect. They come back for clobetasol, they're like, I got charged 100 something. It's like, how? That's generic. And then the second question I have from that is, how does GoodRx work and how do they get the prices to come down so much? Who's benefiting there?
It's a great question. If you can convince your patients, and I think they're more amenable to this explanation these days. I know we probably, I am as a healthcare consumer, more educated now in this, that if you, sometimes not using your insurance to get a medication is sometimes better than using your insurance, then it's more economical. And GoodRx is involved with that. The problem that I have with GoodRx is that if you look at the top part of their website, you'll find a link that you can get a virtual visit with them for $19.
Right, I saw that.
Yeah, and then you get your medication through them. So if you send your patient to GoodRx, you may be sending them right out of your office. So that's something I don't like about GoodRx. And I have no financial conflicts with any of these companies, but I would like to mention that Mark Cuban is trying to break up and be a disruptor for this process. And he's founded a company called Cost Plus Drug Company. And his company basically has, I can tell you that if you go to their website, you can get your patients a 60-gram tube of clobetasol cream for $13.50 delivered to their home. And so there are definitely ways to do this. And I'll also tell you just a small personal story. I had some of my own prescriptions sent to Amazon Pharmacy recently. And the way that they have it set up is really the way it should be. They ask for your insurance information. They then present you with your options. They tell you how much this medication will cost using your insurance and how much it would cost using their discount program at Amazon. And you can choose, one of those two options. And then they deliver it the same way that they deliver their Prime products.
No, that is really interesting. Then let me go back to maybe the first question. So then what if you send people to a local instead of maybe, this Mark Cuban pharmacy, which is a really interesting thing. And I've heard about the Cost Plus pharmacy as well. A lot of the local private pharmacies, like I have one that's next to me, it's a private pharmacy. They eventually expanded into a compounding pharmacy too, but their main thing is just a private standard pharmacy. They don't like GoodRx. They say GoodRx actually undercuts them and they get pretty cheap prices too. I'm curious what your thoughts are on private pharmacies that aren't necessarily affiliated with like GoodRx and not like a mail-in pharmacy, but you're just your local pharmacist who's not CVS or who's not, one of these big brands.
Sure. I'm sure that there are plenty of local pharmacies that are able to do the same type of things that Mark Cuban is doing, but some of them can't because some of them are beholden. First of all, if the patient comes in with their insurance cards and they want to use their insurance, it has to go through the PBM route. So they can't really do anything. But if the patient says, and this actually, it's interesting because this actually used to be illegal until 2018, which isn't that long ago. The pharmacists weren't even allowed to tell a patient that you could pay less out of pocket than you are with your insurance. They had gag clauses in all of the PBM contracts that forbade the pharmacies from telling this to the patient. Now it is legal, which is why GoodRx can work, and why, if a pharmacy is willing to sell it at a lower markup, you can get it at a more reasonable price. Really what has to be done is your patients have to become better healthcare consumers when it comes to prescription medications, and to get the mindset away from, I need, send it to Walgreens because I need to use my insurance. Because if I don't use my insurance, why would I even pay for it? What's the good of my insurance if I don't use it? Well, the good is that you have probably a high deductible plan, and you're not going to get there anyway if you're reasonably healthy. If all you need is clobetasol, it's probably better for you to pay out of your pocket than it is to use your insurance.
Okay, Mark, so you're telling us all this. I don't know if I'm getting more depressed or more pissed off about this. And our listeners are listening here and saying, Mark, what can I do for this? How can we change this? What needs to happen?
So I'm hoping that some of your listeners are getting as angry as this has made me, and
They feel angry here.
yeah, and basically start saying, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore, because it really is going to take a grassroots uprising in this country to overturn this. And the reason it's difficult is because it's so confusing. So many of our colleagues in dermatology have no idea what I'm talking about. And so how can we possibly expect our patients to know what I'm talking about? But that's what has to happen. All of our colleagues have to understand what's going on, and then all of our patients need to know what's going on, so that this can be brought out in the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and on 60 Minutes. And it was brought out on 60 Minutes once, and the news cycle just washed it away, and it never came back again. It's something that needs to, people to be clamoring about and writing to their Congress people to say, this is appalling, and you got to put an end to this.
Well, Mark, maybe the solution will be our next generation. Maybe we need to educate medical students so when they go out to practice, they understand a little more about this jungle that is out there.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting you bring that up. I've actually been approached by some medical students who've heard my lectures from time to time that they want me to come to their school to talk to all the students about this. And so I'm happy to do it. And it is important to start with the next generation, because the only way that we're going to make this work in the future is to be able to do this. It's interesting that in a country like America, where capitalism is its main goal, a lot of the problems in healthcare is the fact that it's not a free market, right? You talked about, free market transactions at the beginning of this, and that's really what the problem is. If this was a free market transaction, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because drugs would not be that expensive. Now, having said that, it's not so simple, right? Because a lot of the biologics that we prescribe are not inexpensive drugs to develop and not inexpensive drugs to manufacture. So it is something that requires some assistance for the patient. But again, it's gone completely out of control, and we have to, gain back some control of it. Because even those pharmacies like Mark Cuban's, they're really good for clobetasol and a lot of generics, but they're not dispensing adalimumab and the other biologics that we're prescribing. Those aren't being dispensed by these pharmacies.
Yes, Mark, thank you so much for explaining this to us. I mean, I cannot imagine how the ordinary person out in the street is ever going to understand this. I mean, barely physicians understand this, pharmacists understand this. I mean, it takes really someone like you taking the time, investigating, and helping all of us understand a little better. So definitely we want to get you on the circuit, speaking to medical students and maybe spreading out the word, because gosh, this can be really complicated, but yet at the same time, it is so critical to what we do. It is so important that we simplify the process, help patients and clinicians understand how we get the medications that we need so much covered.
I mean, gosh, it's so convoluted I mean, like Mark, you nailed it. Like if we don't understand it, I mean, there's no way, someone that's not even medicine is going to. So yeah, I mean, thank you for simplifying it.
Yes, Mark, thank you so much for simplifying this. Thank you for everything you do. I mean, gosh, being the president of the academy, being a great clinician for your patients, and now a great advocate for all of us to try to understand this process and coverage of medication and do it in such an eloquent way because, gosh, I would never understand it from anybody else. So thank you for your time and thank you for your expertise.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure. Been a pleasure.
Hey, listeners, we want to share some great news with you. Over the last year, we have been reviewing and redesigning the successful Integrative Skin Health series. Newly named Dermatology Clinical and Integrative Essentials, or DCIE, a team of incredible integrative dermatology experts have been working on a new and improved curriculum focused on common patient questions and concerns. We're excited to launch the new DCIE program on January 1st, 2024. And right now, through November 30th, you can save $200 off the regular price when you sign up during our pre-sale. But that's not all. You also get immediate access to the original program, the Integrative Skin Health series. So it's like getting two programs in one.
You know, what's really great about this program is that it's geared towards PAs, NPs, MDs, and other healthcare professionals who are new to the profession or seasoned veterans because, evidence-based integrative approaches are still emerging for all of us.